Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're digging into a deeply fascinating philosophical character study. We're going to examine a guy named Vane. Now, Vane possessed the ultimate artifacts, literally the rarest items in existence, but as we'll uncover today, he entirely missed the point of living. It's really a masterclass in understanding the true cost of control, and it perfectly answers the core question of why Vane wasted his life. Because honestly, clutching too tightly to what you have, that is for sure the fastest way to waste your one and only life.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this single quote completely captures the tragedy of Vane's entire existence. Imagine, for a second, being at the end of the world, or, at least the end of the world as you know it. You're a man who has acquired literally everything there is to acquire, and suddenly you're met with this single, ultimate, unanswerable question. What do you want me to do for you? Just kind of keep this question in the back of your mind, right? Because how Vane responds to it is going to reveal his entire tragedy.
But actually, before we get to that question, we really have to look at the inciting incident. Our source text describes this incredibly fast-paced, catastrophic moment simply called the shift. In a single breath, the counterfeit frequency that essentially underwrote every market Vane moved in, it just died. Basically, his entire massive empire of blackmail, stolen secrets, and fake assets went to absolute zero. And it happened in the span of a power cut. Gone.
Section 1. Keys that open nothing.
So while other men panicked, they went to windows, to phones, dropped to their knees, Vane, he retreated to his vault. He went to look at the ultimate items he'd spent his whole life obsessively collecting. His first prize is Aaron's rod. This artifact is 4,000 years old, kept on a bed of inert gas. According to the lore, this very rod once budded blossoms and ripe almonds overnight just to settle a dead man's argument. Why? Because as the text profoundly notes, choosing is the only agriculture that works on the dead. And this piece of dry wood, it cost Vane a shipping magnate's ransom. He literally ruined 3 men's careers to acquire it. And yet, sitting there in his vault, it had never done a single thing. Nothing at all.
Now, what's really interesting about this is when we contrast that rod with his second prize, Solomon's Seal. It's a legendary ring. And, the legends about exactly where it was lost, they all differ, but they all agree on one foundational rule. It could not be operated by force. Its power absolutely had to be given. Now, Vane spent a fortune hiring mystics, 2 rabbis, a defrocked Jesuit, and a physicist, which I know sounds exactly like the setup to a terrible joke, right? But he hired them all just to find a workaround to this rule. But the rule of the ring is absolute. The ocean gives up nothing cheap.
And this brings us to Vane's fatal operating error. The thing is, he knew there was no workaround to the ring before he even hired those experts. But as the source points out, men like Vane hire people to be wrong, so the wrongness has somewhere to live that isn't in him. He possessed the oldest keys in the world, but he fundamentally refused to understand how they actually worked. Why? Because truly understanding them would mean he'd have to surrender his own control.
Section 2. The unanswerable question. Okay, so the world's architecture has shifted, and suddenly the thresholds between worlds are incredibly thin. Vane steps outside to a newly opened door, plain as a gate, light pouring through, and there's a waiting figure standing there. Now, because Vane only knows one language, he immediately opens negotiations with this figure. He offers this collection, his secret files, his leverage. He literally starts sweating. Finally, out of sheer desperation, he offers everything. But as the word leaves his mouth, he realizes just how little it weighs. Why? Because everything, coming from Vane, was just an inventory. It had never, not once, been a self.
Let's really define this core emptiness, because this gets right to the heart of why Vane wasted his life. When the figure finally asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Vane reaches deep into himself and he finds nothing. Nothing but wanting to have. Layer under layer, it is acquisition all the way down. He traded away his humanity a long time ago, in tiny, reasonable increments, all for the ultimate ability to never need anyone.
This right here is the terrifying climax of Vaughn's life. He searches the internal vault of his soul and realizes he simply cannot answer the figure's simple, genuine question. The plain human thing the question is asking for, like a genuine want, a real need, some kind of vulnerability, it's entirely gone. The trade had cleared, and this absolute emptiness, that was his settlement.
We can really see Vane's cowardice when we contrast it with what Solomon's ring was offering him all those years. The ring performs exactly one operation, and it does it freely: sight. It allows you to look all the way in, to see the whole truth of your own death, and then decide to keep going anyway. King Solomon looked at his own death and he kept building,
kept ruling until he died on his feet. The ring offered Vane that same honest look every single day for 19 years, and Vane refused it. He just couldn't face his own end.
So standing there at the threshold, facing the light he has always wanted but cannot simply just have, Vane does the only thing a man obsessed with leverage knows how to do. He refuses. He puts the ring right back in his pocket and tells the figure, "I'll come back with better terms." But the figure is completely silent. Because the terms of grace have never changed for anyone. They are given, not taken. You simply cannot renegotiate a gift.
Section 3. Holding water, wasting life.
To truly unpack why Vane's refusal is such a massive tragedy, the source material shifts to a framing narrative. We see a character named James explaining this really dense, high fantasy parable to his young son, Eli, over a video call. It brilliantly translates Vane's grand failure into relatable human psychology. James introduces this incredibly powerful metaphor. He says, guys like Vane, they don't get a big ending, because a big ending is something that happens to you, and Vane spent his entire life making absolutely sure nothing could happen to him. James describes Vane's life like a man who spent 80 years trying to carry water in his hands without spilling a single drop on the ground.
It's such a profound life lesson. Think about it. At the end of 80 years of clutching water, you don't even have wet hands. You just have empty, closed fists. James explains an old story that says all humans are essentially like spilled water on the ground. You cannot hold on to it. You were never meant to. The whole point of life is being spilled. The only real question is what your water lands on and whether you allow things to grow. Vane clutched. He never spilled.
To really drive this home, James shares a second parable with his son. He talks about a king who made a strictly enforced rule during a war. Nobody eats until we win. Because of this absolute curse of control, his entire army marches through a forest literally dripping with free honeycomb. And every single soldier walks right past it, starving to death, just too terrified of the rule to even touch it.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact trap Vane fell into. See, the king's son, Jonathan, hadn't heard the rule. He had a staff, and he used it to taste the freely given honey, and immediately his eyes brightened. He could see again. This juxtaposes perfectly with Vane. Vane represents the ultimate self-imposed starvation. He starved in a forest full of honey with his paperwork completely in order, because tasting the honey would have meant admitting it was a gift, and not something he owned.
So what is the ultimate takeaway from James's lesson here? Basically, there are two ways to waste your one life, and Vane managed to find both of them. Number 1, hold your water so tight it never lands anywhere. Number 2, treat what is given as something you could own until you lose the taste of it forever. This is the tragic thesis of Vane's existence and exactly why he wasted his life. Absolute control equals absolute starvation.
Section 4. The Final Bloom. Let's move to and see how this builds.
Because the story isn't quite over, we have to look at Vane's final fate. Eli, who's been listening to all of this, asks a deeply poignant question. So he could still come back? Vane? And James reveals the ultimate tragic grace of the whole situation. The door never closed. The figure never left. The universe just sits there devising ways to bring the banished back. It was Vane who walked away. The question is still standing by that water, waiting, because, as the text beautifully puts it, it waits longer than collectors live.
But Eli notices something else. Earlier, he thought the ending was kind of anticlimactic, because Vane just walked away. But then he realizes the beautiful irony of the story. The climax didn't belong to Vane at all. No, the climax went to the stick.
When Vane turned away from the door, he leaned his weight on Aaron's rod, that 4,000-year-old staff that had been hollowed out by termites, and the staff finally gave way. It snapped right in two. And what the breaking revealed was that the figure propped up on it, Vane himself, had actually been finished for a long time. His own apparatus just hadn't been told yet. Vane falls dead in the grass, but the staff, it's finally free. Free of the glass case, free of the inert gas, free of Vane's controlling hand.
And that leads us to our final, powerful takeaway. Once the staff was finally let go, it immediately did what it had been trying to do for 4,000 years. It provided life. By morning, there were blossoms on it. It's an incredibly evocative thought, isn't it? Vane spent his entire life trying to possess a miracle, and the miracle only happened the second he finally let go of it. So I'll leave you with this question as you look at your own life. Are you carrying water with closed fists, or are you letting it spill so something can finally grow? Thanks so much for joining me today on this explainer. I'll see you in the next one.